the way he presents it. He loves the Jewish people. Yeah, mommy. Okay, so
Morning.
good morning, Shmuel. How are you?
Oh, Hashem, Rabbi.
All right, good. So let's get back to our discussion of the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda of a telekart, which is, as I learned by doing my research, it's telephone kartis, telephone kartis, probably something that most people don't even have anymore. I have no idea, but some people probably still do have it. And what constitutes a simon? Because they all look the same. People don't put their names, despite, people saying, well, put your name on it. No, people don't put their names on it. So the thing that we learned yesterday is that the number of calls that you have left on the telecart, that could be a simon. Now, that's not something that you can necessarily see by looking at the card, but if you scan it or you put it into a reader, then you'll be able to tell, and that would be a simon. That's right. Veneer. Shafilu imotza telekart chadash, minyan hasichot shabo nechshav l'siman. He says, I'll go even further, he says. Since there are telecarts that have different denominations of calls, some are 10 calls, some are 20 calls, some are 40 calls, or 40 minutes, whatever it is. He says that would also be considered a simon, even if the card's never been used. Ki hatois kasvu b'divreihem she'ein b'chav simon mishtei sibot. Tosfos in the Gemara that we saw yesterday about finding barrels that are filled with wine or oil, there's no simon, so you're allowed to keep it. So Tosfos says, why is there no simon on a barrel? He says for two reasons. Echad shehachavit malaya yayin, because the barrel is filled with wine. And I'm just going to switch over to the next page. And beis shekol hachavuyo shavos ba'otam midah. All the barrels have the same amount of wine. They're all the same volume. In other words, there was a standardized size for the barrels. Mashrim b'divreihem dim ein kol hachavuyot shavot ba'otam midah. Afal pishehem alayim nami chayv lahachriz ki midat hachavit hamisim. Right, so that if the size of the barrels varied, then that in itself would be a simon. Tell me what size barrel was it? Was it a 10-gallon barrel, a 50-gallon barrel, or a 100-gallon barrel? Vimkein hu adin b'telekart shelo kulam shavim, ki yeshnam shemechilim asara sichot v'yesh esrim v'yesh chamishim omeya. Each card is different. Some have 10, some have 20, some have 50, some have 100 minutes. Imkein afal pi shematza telekart chadash, and therefore, even though you find a brand new card, chayav lahachriz ki hamida havisimin afal pi shehu malay kevin she'in kol hamidot shavot. And therefore, even if it's a completely unused card, since each card has a unique number of minutes, you have to announce that. And certainly, if a few minutes are missing, have been used, then you have to certainly announce it. And therefore, if you find a card that's been punched, the old punch cards for the bus, for the Egged bus, so that would also be a simon. Devadai haminyan habi simon v'chayiv lahachzer, because you could ask the guy, all right, how many punch holes are there on it? Aklal ha'ola. The bottom line is da motze telekart o kartisiya menukevet ma'at chayiv lahachriz kibin shamidu shavahavisim. That's the bottom line. Is that if you have any card that has any kind of measurement of amount on it, whether it's punch holes or whether it's or whether it's number of minutes left or whether it's number of minutes on the card, then you have to make a public announcement. Okay. So he writes in the footnote an interesting thing. He quotes a number of Sfarim who say, "Dekevin she'in derech anashim lizkor kama sichot nisharu lehem bekartisa telekart Al kain eina motze chayiv lachush lazeh shama abed zocher v'al kain einu chayiv lahachris. There are other Sfarim who disagree with Rab Shirag. They say that people generally don't remember how many minutes are left on their card, and people generally don't remember how many punch holes, have been punched in their bus card. Aval b'sefer hashavas aveda v'shari mishpat kasvu dim nisharu b'telekart mispar sichot shederach anashim lizkor. Okay, but he says in the sefer hashavas aveda that if the card has something that people would normally remember, let's say he only used it for 1 minute, he says that would be a simon. In other words, you have to sort of make an evaluation. Would someone remember? And it's very, very subjective, I think. So I'm not really sure what to do with that. But like in cases of doubt, it's certainly worthwhile at least to try and find the owner and put up an announcement, found a phone card or whatever it is, a Presto card. Yeah. A gift card, or people gift each other gift cards. You can buy them in at Walmart. Yeah, I think so. Then it has no value, and it's not a shava pruta, and there's no mitzvah of a shava saveda, and don't waste your time. Yeah.
You have to buy an
So, yeah.
You have to purchase.
How much does that cost? Really? I didn't know that. So then maybe there is a, maybe there is. I thought like when you buy a gift card.
You're right. For a gift card, it's valueless because it's just whatever cash is on.
Yeah.
But for a TTC card, in order to get one, you have to buy it from the TTC first. Then load it. Correct. That's what I'm saying. If someone would have to pay that in order to purchase it.
All right. The next Shaila reminds me of an old joke. Okay. It's the
That's
mitzvah.
good because none of us are young. So
Hashavas Aveda b'Shabbos b'dvar muktzah. Is there a mitzvah of returning lost items with a muktzah item? Right, because it's not, you find it on Shabbos. So what are you supposed to do? So right. So you know that joke. Three Hasidim are talking about how amazing their Rebbes are. So the first Chassid says, we were walking by. There were torrential rains. There was this huge puddle. My Rebbe said, water here, water here. Water split miraculously, and we walked straight through. And the other chassid says, that's nothing. We were passing by a river. We needed to get across. My Rebbe said, water here, water here. Water split, and we walked right through. The third chassid said, that's nothing. It's one Shabbos, and there was $100 bill on the floor, and my Rebbe said, Shabbos here, Shabbos there. He picked it up and kept going. So anyway, so that's the old joke. So anyway, so the shaila is the Yom Shabbos Chodesh avarti birachov v'ra'iti shenafala adam telefon mehakis. It was one Shabbos, and I was walking down the street, and I see that someone had their phone had dropped out of their pocket. So there's a phone on the floor. There's a cell phone on the floor. So first of all, I saw that the phone fell out of his pocket. In other words, there's a Chiloni guy. On Shabbos, his phone fell. My dilemma is, what am I supposed to do? So I have to tell him, hey, buddy, your phone fell. Shabbat shalom, right? Or should I hide from him? This could come up in Thornhill very easily. Because, on both sides of me, I have neighbors who are Jewish and are not religious. I don't know, across the street from me also. And they're lovely people. I would feel that I would want to tell them that the guy's working on his. Yeah, right. Okay, so what should we do in this situation? So Hagemara Omeret Bebava Metzia Im kohen ra'a aveda bebeis hakvaros lo yitame la kidei lahachzira. So this is the classic case in Bava Metzia about a kohen who sees a lost item in the cemetery. He's not allowed to make himself tameh to go into the cemetery. So and the reason is de'in aseh shel hashavas shel hashavas aveda docha lo tasa shel nefesh lo yitama be'amav. There's a positive mitzvah of hashavas aveda, but it doesn't override the negative commandment that a kohen may not expose himself to tumah. Ba'aseh shel kedoshim yiyu, and the Torah also formulates it as a mitzvah aseh. You shall be holy. V'chein pasak harambam. The Kohanim shall be holy, and that's how the Rambam paskins as well. The Kol Shekain, the Mikreh Hazeh, She'im Yodia Lo Shenafalo HaPelefon, Hu Yachshiloto, Shal Yedei Kach Hu Yuchal Ledaber BePelefon BeShabbos. He says, in this situation, if I tell the guy, hey, Bob, your phone fell out of your pocket, I'm going to cause him to sin, because he's going to pick up the phone and he's going to continue using it on Shabbos. V'lo rak zeh, ela afilu b'tiltul muktzah levad. And even before he uses it, just picking up muktzah is an isser derabana. Kagon shera shenafal echad mea shkalim mehakis b'Shabbos. Let's say I see that he had in his pocket 100 shekels and 100 shekel bill, and it falls out of his pocket. There's no mitzvah of hashavas aveda to notify him, as the Shulchan Aruch paskins shekol shebishalo lo haya metapel ba'aveda gam b'shel chaveiro eno chayiv lahachzir. That if you had lost that object, you would not have worked on retrieving it. You don't have an obligation to retrieve it to its owner. V'chein kosav beferish b'Shulchan Aruch Hagon Rabbeinu Zalman. And the Rab Shulchan Aruch, that's what he calls it. I've never seen anyone refer to that by that way, but it's clear that he's referring to the Rab Shulchan Aruch, the Shulchan Aruch from the Alter Rebbe, right? That what? Yeah, Shulchan Aruch Rav Liadi. Yeah. The afilu iser shel divreihem lo yasa bishvil mamon chaver, that you're not allowed to commit even an iser derabanan in order to save someone's money. Kegon lahagbiya ma'os shematza b'Shabbos. You're not allowed to pick up money that you find on Shabbos. She'ein dochin iser mipnei mammon. You never override even an iser derabanan for money. Shenemar ani Hashem, as the Torah says, I am the Lord. Kulchem chayavim b'chvodi. So you're all obligated in my honor. So in the footnote, the Makor Baruch, he says this is brought down in the Shulchan Aruch Harav, it's brought down in the Chassam Sofer, and the Chesed LaAvraham. He says, "V'lichora hayanira lahakshot areita b'gemara sham dekoin eno machzer aveda shebebeis hakvaros kevin dahavilosa aseh va'aseh kamo shekasav Rabbeinu le'el." He says the problem that I have is the Gemara says that the reason why you don't do Hashavas Aveda when the Kohen sees a lost object in a cemetery is because a positive mitzvah deoraisa does not override a negative mitzvah deoraisa. V'imkein mashma mizeh dim hayolav greda afilu mideoraisa hayinu omrim aseh doichelos aseh. But if it's, let's say, a lower level mitzvah los aseh, maybe a mitzvah aseh does override the mitzvah los aseh. It's like it's a mitzvah los aseh va'aseh, because the Kohen has the negative commandment plus a positive commandment. V'chein hiksha b'mishmaras kahuna, imkein kol shekain sha'aseh zeh hashavas aveda yitzcha iser derabanan shel muktzeh b'Shabbos ve'ich pasak b'Shulchan Aruch Harav lahefech. So why don't you make the following argument? I have a mitzvah aseh mideoraisa to return a lost object. There's only an Isser Derabanan of handling muktzah on Shabbos. So why don't we say that the positive mitzvah aseh mideoraisa of Hashavas Aveda overrides the Isser of muktzah? So there the stumbling block issue that's an Isser Deoraisa potentially, right? Potentially, it's not so clear. It depends on the circumstances. If someone else could tell him, then it's not an Isser Deoraisa. But let's say I'm the only one who sees it, then it could be an Isser Deoraisa if I tell him. But that's the question. Why don't we say that the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda, which is a Torah law, overrides the only a rabbinic ban? Amnam yu'in sham b'shulchan harav b'kuntras achron shehevi mashakosa b'shita mikubetzes b'vava metzia sham b'shem Ramban v'Arashba shekosvu nusach acher b'gemara. That apparently there's a different version of the Gemara, that the reason why the Kohen does not pick up the object in the cemetery is why because we never override a prohibition for the sake of money. It's got nothing to do with asay, los asay, but the more generic response is monetary issues are never override a prohibition. She'ein asay develosia liisha doche iser lav. Ba'afal gav de ba'alma asay doche los asay. That there's a commandment in the Gemara in Ksuva says there's a mitzvah asay that if I seduce a woman, I have to make her my wife because I've disgraced her, or if I rape her or I seduce her, I have to make her my wife because I've disgraced her. But that does not override a mitzvah los asay, even though normally asay docha los asay, because let's say I'm a Kohen and she's a divorcee, so the asay of making sure that she's married does not override the mitzvah los asay of a Kohen marrying a grusha. So he says the reason why it doesn't override it over there is because she's not obligated to agree to marry me. He says because when a woman says, "I forgive you for your seducing me, I just don't want to marry you." So since there's a way to avoid my being over on the Isser, if she would be mevater, if she would say, it's okay, I don't want to marry you, so then we don't say asay docha los asay. V'lachein afim hi lo mevateret mikol makom lo amrinan asay docha los asay. And that's the reason why we say that one of the positive mitzvah of marrying her does not override the negative commandment, because there's always the possibility that she could always be mevater, she could always say it's okay. So that therefore it's not an unconditional mitzvahs asay. V'al pizeh bioru haramban v'harash b'degam b'hashavas aveda l'kohen b'veis hakvaros harei keven shim bal haveda yivater al mamona shebeveis hakvaros b'melo lo yeh mitzvahs asay al hakohen lahashivo l'chein b'chai gavin lo amrinan asay docha los asay. He says that's the principle of monetary issues never override an Isser, even an Isser derabanan. The idea being is that the only reason I have a mitzvah to restore a lost item is because the person has this financial interest in it, and I have a mitzvah to make him financially whole. But since that person who lost the item could always forgive and say, it's okay, I don't need it, I'll live without it, so then it's not an unconditional mitzvah asay of Hashavas Aveda. So anytime you don't have an unconditional mitzvah asay, but it's a conditional mitzvah asay depending upon the wishes of that person, so then we don't say asay docha los asay. That's the reason why that mitzvah asay will never override a prohibition if the mitzvah asay is only involving the restoration of finances. He says, and that's what the Gemara means when it says that we never override an Isser just because of monetary interests. And according to this, the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda will never override an Isser, even if it's a low-level Isser, even an Isser Daraban. The Kosa b'Shulchan Aruch Rav Sham De'im Kain Hu Adin Deinu Doche Isser D'Rabbanan. And that's the reason why it doesn't override a rabbinical Isser, like Muktzah. B'raya lekach daha gam ba'oinas u'mefatel omrin and da'asei belosia leisha docha afilu Isser D'Rabbanan k'moshe pasak haramba. And he brings proof from that very case of a man who seduces or rapes a woman, that even though the Torah says he must marry her, but if there's a stigma that she's even rabbinically usher to him, then he's not allowed to marry her. And therefore, the same thing is true. The Rav Shulchan Aruch says over here that even an Isser D'Rabbanan, like Muktzah on Shabbos, we don't override that for the sake of the mitzvah of HaShabbos Aveda. Chen hu mitzad hasvara dekevin sheinu mechuyev l'kaim esa'aseh kevin shabal haveda yochel levater al mamono b'meila ein heter lavar afilu iser d'Rabbanan l'kaim esa'aseh. It's for the reason that we mentioned, is that in theory the owner of the item could always say, it's okay, you don't have to. And because he could in theory be mevater, we don't allow even a rabbinical iser to be overridden because of that. It's an interesting argument. It's to me, it makes a lot of sense. So where do you draw the line? And that's a really interesting question. I will tell you this: there's an Isser D'Rabbanan of having a Gentile at a Yontif meal. There's an Isser D'Rabbanan of having a Gentile over for a Yontif meal. What's the rabbinic Isser? It's called Shema Yarbe Bishvilo, that you may end up cooking more food for him on Yontif. You're allowed to cook on Yontif, but only for a Jew. You're not allowed to cook on Yontif for a non-Jew. If you invite a non-Jew for a Yontif meal, the rabbi said, we're concerned perhaps you will go ahead and add more food in the oven, and you'll end up cooking more food specifically for the Gentile. So there's a rabbinic ban on inviting Gentiles to your Yontif meals. So I gave a Shabbos Hagadol drasha. The question is, what if you could help a Jew? You could help save a Jew's soul. So for example, my neighbor's son is dating a non-Jewish girl. And my neighbor says, Rabbi, can you have my son at your Seder with his girlfriend? I want to expose her to Yiddishkeit. So there's a common misconception that people have that you're not allowed to have a Gentile at your Seder. Because when we were eating the Korban Pesach, we couldn't include non-Jews. So people think that that applies to the Seder too. That's a fallacy. That is a fallacy. You can always have non-Jews at your Seder. Got nothing to do with the Korban Pesach, okay? The issue is Shema Yarbe Bishvilo. We're concerned. So if you can make the argument that you could help to be Makarev Yid and prevent him from intermarriage by either having him realize that this girl is never going to buy into a Seder, or by maybe being Makarev the girl and having her think about conversion, so that will avoid the whole problem. So then the poskim say you're allowed to invite a non-Jew to the Seder. Okay, and there are other ways that you can circumvent. Like I think Rav Hershel, I have it in my notes. Rav Hershel Schachter was quoted as saying that if you have a non-Jew working in your house at the meal, so then that obviates the prohibition as well, because even if you're tempted to cook more, you could always have the non-Jew do the cooking instead of yourself, right? So to your question, Moish, how far does this go? Like, I can help save somebody. Like, what if the guy discovers that the cell phone fell out of his pocket and he knows that I was walking behind him and I must have seen it, via Chilul Hashem, potentially. So first of all, we have to finish the tshuva. But if it's purely for monetary issues, whether it's my money or his money, I can't say Shabbos here, Shabbos there, and pick it up. That I'm not allowed to do.
Driving across, they have to stop. Now the Jew's driving longer than what he's supposed to be.
No, you're forcing the Jew to press on his brakes, right? So yeah, the taka, there's such an issue that there are people who will wait until the light is green. You know, they're not going to force cars they won't cross the street if they know that they're forcing people who are Jewish to stop the car. The reason why you don't have to be machmir is because you can assume, even in a place like Thornhill, that the people who are driving on Shabbos are Gentile. It's not like you can't say like a majority of the people who are out on the street on a Saturday morning are Jewish, even in Thornhill. I don't think that's because there's plenty of Asians and Iraqis that are in our neighborhood. So therefore you're allowed to, but some people are machmir. Okay. All right. So let's just continue this. He says, "Va'ayin b'sefer Chazon Ovadia Shabbos Gimel Shabbos like the Mishapaga b'Shabbos V'yona rovetzes alef rocheha ve'ena mechuseret seda v'yesh rak isser muktzah lemisha merimota." So the interesting thing that the Sefer Chazon Ovadia, which I think is from Rav Ovadia Yosef, yeah, he writes that if you come across a mother bird on Shabbos who's sitting on her eggs, so there's a mitzvah of shiluach haken, okay, and you want to fulfill the mitzvah, and there's a problem of an isser muktzah, because by lifting up the mother bird or touching the mother bird, you are handling muktzah. You're not allowed to handle a bird on Shabbos. In other words, we're talking about a docile bird that you don't have to trap. So yochol l'kayim b'zeh mitzvah shiluach hakein ki hamitzvahs aseh deoraisa doche iser muktzah derabanan. He says you can fulfill the mitzvah of shiluach hakein. Why? Because the biblical commandment of sending away the mother bird, overrides the negative prohibition that's only midirabanan of handling muktzah. That's how Rav Ovadia sees it. He says, "Va'ayin sham beha'aros shehevi shapasa ken al pi divrei haritva besukah, v'harbe poskim shekasbu dinatilas lulav deoraisa doche iser muktzah midirabanan." He says Rav Ovadia is going like a ritva, who says that you can pick up a lulav on Shabbos to fulfill the mitzvah of shaking the lulav, because it's only an iser derabanan of muktzah. Chen mima shekasbu atoisus beveitza sheish l'kayim mitzvahs kisei hadam kishashachat b'yom tov, afal pi she'afer hu muktzah k'dei l'kayim mitzvah deoraisa. And similarly, you can do the mitzvah of kisei hadam if you shecht a chicken on Yantif. You can there may be only an iser deoraisa of handling earth to cover the blood. V'lachein hachanami yesh l'kayim mitzvah shiluach hakein deoraisa. V'litchos iser muktzah midirabanan ad kan tochen devarav. And therefore here too, you can fulfill the mitzvah of sending away the mother bird midioraisa, even if it's at the expense of the prohibition of muktzah. And that's very problematic. He says, "V'tzarachim delefima shekasavti le'el b'shem Ramban v'Arashba, harei ein omrim asei dochelos asei bonus umlefata v'chein ba'aveda v'afilu b'isud rabbanon, keven shenu muchrach lavar al alav me'achar she'ochel levater la mitzvah chamo shenishnes." He says, I don't understand. He says, you can be mevater on the mitzvah. You don't have to fulfill the mitzvah of shiluach hakein, of sending away the mother bird. You can. It's an optional mitzvah. It's only if you want the eggs. But what if you don't want the eggs? You don't have to fulfill the mitzvah. And just like we said before, that if since the person in theory could be mevater on the lost item, you're not obligated. There's no perforce mitzvah here. Im kein hachanami lechora kol hamitzvah l'shaleach et ha'em hainu davke kisherotz et ha'beitzim. Im kein yevater ala beitzim kedei shelo lavar alav. So why don't we just tell a guy, just decide you don't want the eggs. You no longer have a mitzvah of sending away the mother bird, and you won't violate the Yisur D'Rabbanan. So this is our question, and it obviously gets into more detail. And he's going, wow. It's quite a lengthy tshuva. So I think we'll hold it here for today. And we'll continue in Mirz Hashem tomorrow. You can absolutely walk away from it. As a matter of fact, the